Hello everyone, my name is Ankit Jain. I welcome you all to my channel Tech Journey with Ankit. Here I am with another scenario-based interview preparation series where we will be discussing all the queries or all the different types of questions that you might encounter in your Salesforce interview. Before I starting the today's video, I would like to first say thanks to each one of you to letting me know that how you are finding this particular series very helpful. Again, in case you folks want to reach out to me, you can definitely have one-to-one connect with me on the Topmate, or you can also join the Telegram group where we do discuss all the queries that you encounter in your Salesforce journey. So without further delay, we can get started with our first question. My first question states here is there are two classes, class A and the class B. Here the class A is annotated with the with sharing keyword and the class B it is annotated as the without sharing keyword. Now, what will be the sharing context of the class B's method when it is invoked by the class A? The point to note here is there are two classes with the different sharing context where the class A, which is having the with sharing context, it is calling the class B, which is having the without sharing context. What I would appreciate you folks, like I always says, pause the video, attempt the answer, post your answer in the comment section, and then try to see the answer. In this way, we can both communicate whether these answers are right or wrong, and you can also evaluate whether you are going correct or not. So what will be the answer for this? Let's try to understand it. So the answer for this here is when the class A, which is annotated as with sharing, and calling the class B, which is annotated as without sharing, the class B will always execute in the without sharing context. Why? Because here the where the method is defined not by calling the class. The sharing context is always governed where the method is defined not by calling the class. There's another keyword that we do have, which should drive how the sharing context should be driven when it is calling by the class. Again, if you know that keyword that you should put, we should derive the sharing context by calling, not by defining. Do let me know in the comment section. But for the answer for this question here will be the without sharing. Again, how this complete scenario will look like, I tried to put that in the code as well so that you guys can more relate. So there are two classes, one with sharing, another is without sharing. Now what we are doing here is from the class A, we are calling the class B, which is having the without sharing context. Now the question was, what was the sharing context while this calling? Again, the sharing context for the class B while calling will be without sharing because it will always go how the method is defined, not by how the method is getting called. I hope you guys got the clarity with sharing and without sharing. Now let's move to the next question. Another question here is, can we set the calling order of the wire methods in LWC? Is it possible to set the calling order of the wire method? So imagine that you do have one lightning web component. In that lightning web component, you have defined two or more than two wire decorators. Is it a way you can go and control your first wire method should execute first, followed by the second? What we typically call in the programming languages is the chaining. Is it possible to do that? Again, think about it. In case the answer is no, what can be the workaround that you can propose to the interviewer here? Again, as I said, you cannot directly control calling order of the wire methods. The reason being they're automatically invoked by the framework. You do not have any control to invoke the wire decorator directly, right? It will be invoked by the framework as soon as the component is initialized. But do we have a workaround to do this? Again, the answer is yes. What is the workaround? The workaround here is by using the reactive variable. So how to get that done? Again, let's try to understand. So this is my lightning web component. In that lightning web component, there are two wire methods. This is the first one and this is the second one. Now I want, for example, my second method should be called after my first method has been invoked. How I am doing this? So let's say I am invoking both the methods, but here you guys can see I am using here the reactive parameter. So as soon as the first data value has been set, my second wire decorator will be invoked here. So this is the way to invoke the wire decorator by setting up the chaining. So the answer to this here is directly it is not possible, but with the help of reactive parameters as a workaround, you guys can do that. Moving to the next question. This question says that I have three batch classes and while running them, how I can ensure that they don't overlap with each other. So what the interviewer wants to do, he do have the 3 batch classes. He wants to make sure that all these 3 batch classes should not overlap with each other. Basically, he wants to say that all these 3 batch classes should be running one after the other. Again, kind of an example of the chaining. Previously, we have seen how to implement the chaining in the LWC. Now here the ask was how you can go and implement the chaining in the batch classes. Okay, and how you can set the execution order of these batch classes to basically to handle the execution of the multiple batch classes. Basically, to implement the chaining in the batch classes, what you have to do here is in the batch class, we all know that we do have the 3 methods. One is the start, second is the execute, and third one is the finish. So here you have to come back to the finish method, and in the finish method, you will be invoking the next batch. So the way you will go and implement this here is, imagine that there are 3 batches that you do have: first batch class, second batch class, and the third batch class, where the second batch class should be invoked after the first batch class is completed. So what you will do in this scenario, you will come to the finish method. In the finish method, you will go and invoke the second batch. Again, do make a note that you cannot invoke another batch from the start or the execute method, because there can be a follow-up question. Can you do that in the execute or in the start method? So do take a note. You can only invoke another batch from the finish method, not from other methods of the batch apex. Now, another very tricky or interesting question, how to call the wire methods on the button click in LWC. Do we have a provision to do that? Because a few minutes before we discussed that wire methods are something which will be invoked by the framework. When it will be invoked by the framework, whenever the component is initialized, or it can also be invoked whenever the parameters are changing. But here the interviewer wants to check with you, is it a way to invoke the wire methods whenever the user is clicking on the button? Again, direct answer to this question will also be the no. There is no way you can do that. But again, the workaround that can be done is by using the reactive variable. So you guys can see that there are multiple ways to ask the similar kind of a question. Interviewer will always wants to trick you with the different scenarios so that he can check how you go and think about the solution whenever any scenario will come to you. Again, what we will do in this scenario, we will go and update the reactive variable in the response of the button click. So again, I tried to put a pseudocode for this as well. So for example, you on clicking of the button, you will be calling the method that is the click handler. What the click handler will do, it will go and set this particular flag value to true. Initial value of the flag value, we have set it as blank or false, whatever you want to do, right? But as soon as the user is making some click, we are setting this flag value to true. As this particular keyword has been changed, wire decorator will be invoked, because we are using this particular keyword as a reactive variable here. And as soon as the reactive parameters has been changed, just now we discussed that your wire decorator will be invoked and your wire method will be called. Typically, on the click of the button, we go for the imperative apex, but performance-wise, wire decorator is much better as compared to the imperative apex. That's why many of the people do this kind of a tweak in case your component that you are building, it's a performance critical component. Otherwise, the straightforward way to achieve this kind of a requirement is always go with the imperative apex. Now, how can a batch class be invoked from a lightning component? So you do have a lightning component, imagine that. And from that lightning web component, now you want to invoke the batch class. Is it possible? That is the first question. In case not, what can be the workaround then? Think about it. Do let me know in the comment section if what you guys think for this one. You cannot directly execute a batch class from the lightning component. Directly, it is not possible to do that. The reason being, lightning web components or lightning aura components, both, they can only invoke the aura enabled annotation methods only. So you cannot invoke directly the batch class from there. But as a workaround, what you can do from the lightning components, you can invoke the aura enabled methods in the apex. And from that apex method, definitely you can go and submit the batch job. So for example, from your lightning web component, you will be invoking the aura enabled method, right? And from that Aura enabled method, you can go and submit the batch job, putting the database dot execute batch. In case you want the similar kind of a question can be tweaked, can we submit the queuable jobs? Again, the answer is yes. You can again follow the similar kind of an approach and submit the queuable jobs as well. Moving to the next question now. Is it possible to modify or deactivate the triggers in the production? One of the very frequently asked question. The reason being, many times we do face kind of a scenario where we have to go and deactivate the triggers. Pretty common example, if you have to do the bulk number of records at that time, you don't want a particular trigger should be invoked, right? Now the question that they are asking here is it possible for you to go and modify or deactivate the trigger here? If yes, how it can be done? If not, what can be the possible workaround to meet this requirement? Think about it. You might have already faced similar kind of a scenario whenever you will be working for the implementations. Again, coming back to the solution now. You cannot directly modify or deactivate a triggers in the production. Many of you might already know that there is no way you can go and change the apex or activate or deactivate the triggers directly in the production. The standard practice always is to do the changes in the sandbox and then promote that changes into the production. But for example, you are working on the hot fix and you have to immediately perform this action. So how you can go and do this? The best answer for this question here is whenever you guys will be implementing the trigger, make sure that you are following the trigger framework. Salesforce have provided their own trigger framework. You can follow that, or there are lots of frameworks which are available on the web. You can use any of that framework. If you are using that framework, then this kind of problem will never come because the frameworks will give you the switch to activate or deactivate the trigger. Very soon, I'm planning to start the series on the triggers as well, as many of you have already demanded. So make sure that you folks are following the channel to get the updated when the new series will be started on the channel related to the triggers, where I'll be covering the multiple scenarios on the triggers in very detail. Again, coming back to this question, how it can be done if it is not possible, or basically at the back end, what the trigger framework generally do. They either use the custom settings or the custom metadata. Again, with the help of custom settings or the custom metadata, you can do a tweak and avoid modifying the triggers, and you can go and activate and deactivate the trigger. The reason being, admins can directly go and change the values of the custom settings or the custom metadata in the production, although they cannot modify the triggers, but they can go and change these values. So basically here, if they are changing the values and we are checking for the particular condition, which will providing the flexibility to quickly go and enable or disable the triggers. Again, how this can be implemented, I have tried to put a small code for that. So for example, when my trigger is executing, I'm checking whether this trigger is active or not. How I am checking? So this is the small utility that I have created here. In that utility, I am passing the trigger name for which I want to check. In this scenario, the trigger name will go as the account trigger as the same trigger name. Now, in this example, I am using here the custom settings to go and do that. So what I am doing here is, again, you can also use the custom metadata. It's completely up to you. You can either go with the list custom settings or you can go with the custom metadata. Here I'm going for the custom settings. I'm checking here for the custom settings with the trigger name. Now, what is this trigger is returning? Whether this trigger is returning me that is active is true or is active is false. Accordingly, I am processing with my trigger. So this is how you can easily go and use the custom settings or the custom metadata inside your trigger to validate whether the functionality should work as expected or not. Another question, your organization has a flow setup to automate the user onboarding. This flow performs the following actions in a single transaction. So you do have a one flow which is performing the two operations. First one is it is creating the user record, and second one here is creating the contact record. However, when the business user is performing these operations, they are encountering with the mixed DML error. Now there can be first question, why this error is coming? There can be another question here is how you can overcome with this error. So again, if you know the answer for this question, do let me know in the comment section why this particular error is coming and how you can overcome it. So why this particular error is coming? This particular error is coming because you are performing the operations on the setup as well as the non-setup objects. So whenever in one single transaction you perform the DML operations on the setup as well as the non-setup objects, you will get the mixed DML error. The best way to avoid the mixed DML error here is you do the one transaction in the synchronous way and another transaction in the asynchronous way. With respect to the Apex, you can do that by using either the queuable Apex or by using the future method. Now here the question asked is specific to the flow. So how you can do that? So again, in the flow to execute the operation in the asynchronous way, we do have the two options. First one, we can go and use the pause element, right? And we can go and start that pause element by using the platform event. Okay, either you go and pause the element for a particular second so that it can be executed in a separate thread, or to resume that transaction, you can also use the platform event. That is the one way. Another way here is you go and create the user record, for example, in the synchronous way, and you go and create another record by using the asynchronous path. So you can go and create the asynchronous path inside the flow in which you can go and split the two different transactions. Next question, in an Apex class, which is annotated as with sharing. Okay, and this class do contains the SOQL query on the account object. So there are two things. First keyword that you have to understand from this question here is with sharing. And now the user is trying to make a SOQL query on the account object with a custom field. For example, this is the custom field that user is having. When the user is trying to perform the operation, what error user could get if the user does not have access to this particular field? Okay, so the class is written as with sharing. Moreover, the user is trying to execute the query, but one of the custom field user does not have the access on the account object. What kind of error that user will encounter here? Again, what you guys think? Whether the user is getting any security exception or not? What do you guys think about this? Again, the answer to this question here is user will not get any error. Again, here the concept of the user mode and the system mode will come. Many of you already know that Apex class always executes in the system mode. Even though you are using the with sharing keyword, it will only take care of the sharing rules. It will not take care of the field level as well as the object level security, unless and until you are specifically going and implementing it. Again, do let me know in the comment section what all the different options which are available to implement the field level security in the Apex. There are 2 or 3 options. You guys can go and use any of this or propose any of this, but do let me know in the comment section if you guys know how you can take care of the field level security while writing down the Apex code. Again, coming back to this question, as you are using only the with sharing keyword, user is not taking care of any field level security. So definitely no errors will be encountered here. Another question, what is wrapper class? They might ask you to write down a sample code to show how to use the wrapper class. Very frequently asked question again, because wrapper class is something that we do use in majority of the complex requirement. So the expectation here is you should know what is wrapper class and basically how to use that wrapper class extensively. So how this answer will come up? Again, wrapper class, again, it's nothing but another class with the help of which you are building your own data structure. All right. Typically, we do get the few data structure out of the box. For example, your list, collections, maps, few of the primitive data types. But what if you want to build your own data structure? The answer to this here is the wrapper class. It is typically used to encapsulate the multiple related objects or the field. You do not want to send the separate data, right? For example, you are building a UI and on the click of the button, the ask is to get account, cases, contacts, and opportunities. Your method can only have the one return type. You cannot go and send these 4 different data right? In such scenarios, you will go for the wrapper class. So how to typically design the wrapper class? So for example, this is my class, and in that class, this is my wrapper class. So what I am doing, let's try to understand this example. In this class, I am making the queries on the account object and getting the related cases, contacts, as well as the opportunity. Now I got my complete result and get that stored in this accounts collection. Now, what I'll be doing next here is I am iterating over this accounts collection one after the other. And by the end of this, I need to go and send my wrapper class. So this is my wrapper class in which I am adding the data. Now, how I have designed the wrapper class? While adding the data into the wrapper class, I am calling the constructor of my wrapper class. So this is my wrapper class, which does have 4 properties. One is the account, cases, contacts, as well as the opportunity. For each one here, I have defined the getters and the setters because I need to go and set that values before I am sending it back. Right. So that's why I am defining here the getters as well as the setters for this properties. This is the notation to go and write down the getters as well as the setters. Now, as soon as I am adding any values into that wrapper, my constructor will be called. So as soon as this step has been executed, the control will come here and my wrapper will be invoked. What I am passing here is the account. So I will get the account here. Now from that account, whatever data that I need to fetch, I go and fetch it here and populate it in different properties. So what will happen as soon as this constructor will be invoked, these properties values will be populated. Right? And what we are doing, we are adding these properties values again back into the wrapper and sending it back. In case you folks didn't practice the wrapper, make sure that you guys are writing down this code at least once before you go for the interview, because this is one of the most frequently asked question in the interview, how to use the wrapper classes. Here they want to evaluate whether you're able to write down the complex scenarios or not. So do make sure that you guys are practicing the wrapper class in very detail. Another question here is, I have one Apex method which I want to call in sharing mode for internal authenticated users. So they do have one Apex method which they want to call in sharing mode for the authenticated users, and they want to call it in without sharing mode for the unauthenticated users. So dynamically they want to make the decision whether that particular Apex method should be called in with sharing or without sharing. How you can go and achieve this? Okay. How you can go and achieve this. So imagine that you do have the 3 classes, class A, class B, and class C. Okay. Now you do have one method written in the class C. Okay. And what they want here is that method should be called from the class A. Imagine that the class A is defined is with sharing mode. It should be calling it for the authenticated users with the with sharing. Similarly, you do have the class B, which is defined as the without sharing mode and which will be getting called by the authenticated users. Your class A and class B both calling the methods of the class C here. Now, the question here is how you can make sure that the class C is getting invoked based on the calling of the Apex method. So what is the option for that? The easiest way to implement this here is by using the inherited sharing keyword. So what you can do in this scenario, you can go and define the class C with the inherited sharing keyword. Inherited sharing, basically it will allows a class to inherit the sharing context from the calling class. This is the best benefit of the inherited sharing. And that is why Salesforce have introduced this keyword, because it will solve most of the complex requirements. It will allow a class to inherit the sharing context. So if your class is getting called with sharing or without sharing, at the runtime, it will go and accept that context. It is very useful in the scenarios where you want to enforce the different sharing mode based on the caller's context. So do make sure that before you go for the interviews, your concepts are clear for with sharing, without sharing, and the inherited sharing, when to use what particular type of the sharing mode here. Another question, a developer have written a trigger that performs the following action. The first thing that it is performing here is it is inserting the record into the custom object. After that, the next step that it is doing here is it is enqueuing a queuable job. The next step it is doing here is it is enqueuing a queuable job. So you do have one trigger which does two steps. First, perform the insert operation on the custom object. Second step, it is enqueuing a queuable job. How to submit the queuable job? Do let me know in the comment section again. Now, what is happening here is during the trigger execution, an exception has been occurred. Right? Let's say while you are performing this DML operation and after you have executing this queuable job, there is another step in which some exception has been occurred. So you have actually submitted the job into the queue, but because of that exception, your transaction is rolled back. Now the question here is, as your transaction is rolled back, but your queuable job is submitted to the queue, whether that queuable job will execute or not. What will happen to that queuable job? Whether it will execute and do the processing or it will also be rolled back. Again, this question can be answered easily if you know how the order of execution works in the Salesforce. This question is basically to take your testament on the order of execution. If you do have the correct understanding of the order of execution, you guys can easily answer this. Because in the case of order of execution, all the asynchronous operations will only execute if your transaction is successfully committed into the database. It will always come in the last. Right? In this scenario, as the transaction is rolled back, your asynchronous operation, it will never be executed. So what will happen? Although your job is queued, but if the transaction is rolled back, your queuable job, it will never execute. So do make sure that you guys do know the order of execution steps very well before you go and prepare for the interview. Another question, very simple question again. If a user is frozen, an email alert is associated with the name. Okay, so what the admin have done, they have freeze the user. But again, what is happening here is there is one email alert which is associated with that username. Now you do have one record triggered flow which is sending that email alert. Now the question here is, as the user is freezed, whether this particular scenario will work or not, or you will get any exception here. Because the user is frozen, but the email alert is associated, whether any exception will occur or the scenario will work. Think about this. This is where you should know the difference between the freezing of the user and the deactivation of the user. If you know that difference, which I have covered in very detail in the first part, you will easily answer this question. So what the freezing of a user will do, again, I am repeating, freezing a user will only prevent from logging into the Salesforce. It is not releasing the license. As the license is not released, whatever the email alert and the email addresses that are associated with that user, it will still work. So in this scenario, you will not get any exception. If the question has been tweaked, that user is deactivated, then what will happen? Then definitely you will get an exception here. Next question. Assume we have a lead and the owner of the lead is Q. Okay, so imagine that you do have one lead, and for that lead, the owner of the lead here is Q. Now what they are doing the lead conversion, and on the lead conversion, account, contact, and the opportunity will be created. Now the question here will be, who will be the owner of the lead? Do make a note that there are few objects in this list for which Q cannot be the owner. Right? So when they are converting the lead for which the owner is the Q, now on the lead conversion, who will be the owner? If you have ever done the lead conversion or you worked on the lead conversion, you might already know the answer for this, because this type of question can only be answered if you actually worked on that kind of a scenarios. So the easiest answer here is the Q does not become the owner of the converted record. So who will be the owner? The owner of the converted record will be the user who is doing that conversion. Automatically, Salesforce will take that user record who is doing the conversion and populate that user as the owner of that record. Definitely, you can add some automations in between to change the owner if you want to, but by default, The user who is doing that conversion will be the owner of the converted records here. Very tricky, but very important question. Now, there are few questions that I want you guys to attempt, and do let me know the answers for this in the comment section. The very first question here is you guys have to write down an SOQL query to fetch an opportunity which is having the maximum amount. Okay, so make sure that here you guys will be using the aggregate queries to get the opportunities which is having the maximum amount. Another question here is you guys have to write down an SOQL query which will give me the list of accounts which was created yesterday. So in this query, you will be using the date literals to get the list of accounts which are created yesterday. I hope you guys will answer this in the comment section. Moreover, I also hope that you guys found this particular video also helpful and get few learnings from this video as well. Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section if you are finding it helpful or not. Otherwise, thank you. Have a good time, folks. Bye bye.